everyone. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, also a pediatrician and a family therapist and psychotherapist at Semmelweis University. And I deal with mentally disordered families and children. This lecture, I thought, which would be the good focus of the lecture, and I thought that might be the way how children get in to the psychiatric care, because we take a very cautious steps to care them according to the law, but can they come to the child and adolescent psychiatric wards? No, they can't. Most of our countries suffering from the shortage of child and adolescent mental health care. So this region cries for help. So that's why I thought that we might have a dialogue on how can we improve our care and what's the sense of improving the care. There's a new generation arising. We don't call this generation a millennial anymore. We call them a pandemic generation. And you can imagine a 5-year-old little one who spent 3 years in lockdown. Very interesting experiences she and the whole nation got about these 3 years. I would like to speak about the burden of mental health problems and then what happened with our children in our region in the past 4 years. The burden of mental health problems. You might know, and we all know, that mental health in childhood is so important. The mental health is the basis of our creative nations, the basis of our future potential as a nation. So children are our future, and the health and mental health of our children is our future. So I'm so happy and I feel so honored, and thank you very much, Pászthy, and your crew to organize this conference, because sometimes I, as a person who deals with children, a medical doctor, feel abandoned. Sometimes I don't feel the low issues, and I'm so happy to meet you, and I'm so happy that we all together can put together our knowledge about child care and children's rights. So those children can fulfill and achieve their optimum psychological and social functioning who has mental health. Those children who has mental health has a sense of identity, good identity, a sense of self-worth, and the possibility of good family and peer relationships in the future. They can be productive, creative, and they can tackle the developmental changes and use the cultural resources. So mental health is the basis of the quality of life and the future. Of course, adolescence is a very stormy period. We all remember, or we might remember, this is a very critical stage in the life course. And investments in children and adolescents will improve their lives today, but will improve our nation's quality of life and the new generation later on. There are very sad numbers, according to UNICEF measurements. Every 7 children in our region has mental health disorders. That means not mental health problems, but mental health disorders, according to the DSM-5. That means in this region, from 10 to 14 years, 13% of the boys and 11.2% of the girls suffer from mental health problems. And the numbers are equal, 14% later on from 15 to 19. Every 7th child seeks for help, and we cannot provide help for them. They have right to grow up in peace. They have right to grow up in health and mental health, but we cannot provide good, sufficient system for them. Mental health problems are still hidden disorders and are still stigmas. Only 10 to 20% of the cases are recognized as primary health care workers. I myself organized a conference called HOPPA in Hungarian for 10 years just to help primary health workers to understand mental health problems. This is because they are the filter of these problems. And the vast majority of children did not and does not receive appropriate health. There are sub-threshold disorders as well, which don't meet the full criteria of mental health problems, or they will develop mental health problems later on. The average delay between the onset of symptoms and the intervention is 8-10 years, can be 8-10 years. So the child loses its childhood. So lost childhood, yes. Our patients, and my patients especially, complaining about lost childhood. They are coming to my office and telling me, oh, doctor, we are losing our childhood. This is such devastating world at the moment. We don't have children. We don't want to have children. We don't want to be parents. We don't want to study. We are unmotivated to do anything because the world is suffering. The world is dying. Where to go? Where to fly as a teenager? Very, very sad and mournful sentences. 1/10 of the children at aged 5 to 16 have diagnosable conditions, and 75% of all mental health problems start until early adulthood. So we have to be very careful with our children, adolescents, and young adults, because this is the very good prevention to filter them and help with them with efficient help. Anxiety and depressive disorders are the leading causes of mental health problems. Then comes the conduct disorders, attention deficit problems, developmental and intellectual disorders, and remaining others. Self-harm is the top 10 causes of death for adolescents between the age of 15 and 19 worldwide. And as I told you, the suicide as a cause of death is very important, very important. Every 11 minutes, a young adult from childhood to young adult dies because of suicide. 90% of those who died by suicide had underlying mental illness. They are preventable death if we know these illnesses before. And children feel that they are alone. 37% of students with mental health conditions drop out of school. They have right to go to school. And 70% of youth in state and local juvenile justice systems have mental health illness. Do we care them? Are there a group of psychologists there? Do we have group preventive programs helping these children and adolescents in juvenile justice and young adults? No, we don't. Mental health is still a stigma. It's a misunderstood disorder, still full of victimization, biases, stereotyping, fear, embarrassment, anger. These children are rejected at school or avoid meeting others. They experience violations against their human rights, and they experience the denial of opportunities to educate and learn properly. This stigma blocks children from seeking help and limits their opportunities to grow, limits their opportunities to thrive and learn. And often parents are blamed, which is not good. If we blame the parents, we cannot help them. So regardless if it's a good parenting, as the professor told us, or not good parenting, these are our children's, our patients' parents. So we have to help them being a better parent. So misunderstood symptoms, which cause with social exclusion, punitive actions, criticism, which leads to lower self-esteem, and in a vicious circle, it leads to psychiatric disorder, mental health problem, anxiety, depression, and so on. In children and adolescents, a mistaken and inappropriate understanding of mental disorders can result being deprived from health care. We don't have health care, but even with this very shortage of health care is not offered to children because we don't understand the symptoms. We understand, oh, it's a hysteric girl, but this girl has a severe anorexia nervosa. Or this is a bad boy, but this bad boy has autism spectrum disorder, which has never, ever been diagnosed. So we have to be very careful with these mental health symptoms. Good mental health of children will lead to creative, productive nation, the basis of our future, the basis of our creativity as a nation. There are three spheres influencing mental health: the world of the child, the world of the genetics, the world of mothers, fathers, caregivers, adequate nutrition at the very beginning, and safe homes, engaged caregivers. The bigger circle is the world around the child: good schools, online and personal protection, healthy attachments in schools and communities. And the yellow is the world at large, which is in a big problem at the moment. Trauma and stress occurs in everyday routine, in our lives and our children's lives as well. In small doses, stress can be fine. It's essential for healthy brain development, essential for mental health. We can understand good coping mechanisms, and if we win, then our self-esteem is higher and higher, and we will be healthy adults. But what happens when it's toxic? It damages toxic stress, which can last for lifetime. And toxic stress can interfere with brain development, and this is an issue we are not speaking that frequently about. Toxic stress experienced perinatal and experienced for young children because of the lack of good nutrition, the lack of good parenting, because of neglect or abuse, will lead to a lifetime toxic stress. And we psychiatrists very heavily or almost no way that you can cure this type of problems. The impact of toxic stress can limit the neural connections in region of the brain which is involved in reasoning, learning, memory functions, decision-making, the prefrontal cortex, and behavior regulation or impulse control. So all those who suffer from early abandonment, neglect, or abuse, or malnutrition will experience these type of problems. Or the toxic stress can overproduce the connections in the region involved in responses to fear, anxiety, impulse control. These are almost irreparable changes of the brain. What happened in 2019? So I'm speaking about the world at large nowadays for the forthcoming 10 minutes. 2019, something happened with the climate change movements, and some new disorders arose in our practices. Climate change actions was the most likely and with the most impact of the global risk worldwide. And youth disillusionment was involved in the Global Risk Report of 2021. Great news. We have something to rely on, we have something to show, we have something to speak to our governments, that youth disillusionment, the mental health problems of youngsters, is a global risk worldwide. It has never ever occurred in the Global Risk Report before 2021. There were these big movements raised on social media, and as far as our children are spending 4-6 hours on social media, they were absolutely involved in these youth disillusionment and the youth programs. Greta Thunberg became the voice of the entire generation. I didn't agree with that. I think she was the victim of this whole media fuss about this thing. And she was very vulnerable because she herself had mental health problems. She herself wrote in his book that she has Asperger disorder and eating disorders. So there was a girl with a mental health problem who was addressed to be the voice of the nation. I think it's a great responsibility of the adults, and I have problems with the human rights here. And eco-anxiety, we have never ever heard as doctors, as psychiatrists, as psychologists about this disorder. Eco-anxiety, the chronic fear of environmental cataclysm that comes from observing the seemingly irrevocable effect of climate change. And children, 2019, came to our institutions with eco-anxiety, anxiety. The symptoms were stress, sleeping disturbances, depression, panic, nervousness, guilt feeling, suicidal ideations. And then just the climate anxiety we all might remember didn't even stop, but the COVID raised. The COVID pandemic came in January 2020. And now not the climate change was the most likely problem of the world with the biggest impact, but the infectious disorders in 2021. And the mental health deterioration next year became reported as one of the biggest fears of the Global Risk Report in 2022. So again, great opportunity. We can use these data when we are having negotiations with our governments. Crisis over crisis for our children. And the adolescence is a crisis itself. So when these crises just build up on each other, it's unbearable for a child because they cannot cope with that. At this time, the adolescent time, what's the role, what's the task of a child or an adolescent? Need to separate from the parents, build their individuation, redefining their relationship with the parents, with pals, in the society. But how can they separate themselves from the families? How can they find their own voice? How can they find their own individuation if the world is changing and frightening around them? Continuity, flying as an adolescent, flying and understanding the whole life, understanding the world, be brave to experience the world. How can they fly? How can they be brave to experience the world? Because they are frightened of the world changing in an unfavorable way. How can they make new friends? How can they make new relationships if there was social distancing for 3 years? It was extreme for our children. And especially the COVID-19 had a very big impact on minors and for those who were suffering in mental health illnesses. At 2020, in almost 200 countries, schools were closed. Children experienced changing in their routines, breaking the continuity of learning, breaking the continuity of healthcare. They missed significant events, they lost security, they lost safety. There was a big problem of child protection. We were not able to reach these children. They were in locked down families. And it was a big problem that we have to at once solve the online child protection systems. So we have to find digital solutions how to protect these children. So during lockdown, when schools and legal preventive services did not function, these children experienced more violence, abuse, and harm in their abusive homes. So what about their rights? And then, after climate change, fear, after COVID, then came long COVID with extreme symptoms. The long COVID with tiredness, constant fatigue, difficulty in thinking, this brain fog, headaches, dizziness. So children experienced not well-being. They experienced that they are ill health. There were neurological and mental impairments and physical impairments as well, like chest pain or constant cough or joint muscle pain or constant fever. And then the pandemic was over just after 2 months, the war in Ukraine 2022 started. So do you remember my picture with the yellow, the world around the child? What's happening here? What our children experiences? War in Ukraine started and war hits the children first. You might remember because all our countries were involved in this, helping the people who were flee. In our offices, child psychiatry and psychology offices, the flee, the war was an absolute everyday routine topic which we have never experienced before. And then not even stopped the Ukraine war. War in Gaza started. What happened? During social media, children's stories, because the first hit was in a disco, 200 children died there, children who were teenagers. So our teenagers were frightened, although they were not involved. So World in Gaza is an extreme reality here in this region as well, because in social media, it comes to our homes, to our children's homes. So lost childhood, yes. And there's a wonderful exhibition outside. And I made some photographs just 5 minutes before my talk. And I wanted to show you that these are not my patients. These are normal children from normal schools, typical children from normal schools. But war hits children. These children are afraid of being killed, being hit, and war is the reality of their everyday life. This could be my patients' drawings, but they are not. They are healthy children's drawings. Nowadays, you ask them to draw. I just made these wonderful photographs of these wonderful pictures, but these children are frightened. They are afraid. And if we tune their brain in their early childhood, it means that it will have extreme impact later on when they will be adults. So care for the environment, care for the world represents a challenge for all of humanity. It is a matter of common and universal duty, that of respecting a common good, as Saint John Paul II tells us. So thank you very much for your kind attention. It's 20 minutes now, so I have to stop. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer them outside later on. Thank you very much.